evangelism, talking about the approaches to evangelism. All right, and so that's what he's going to be sharing with us in a couple minutes. As I mentioned earlier, Israel is the Dean of Academic Affairs at Artios Christian College. That is the training arm of our conference. The Artios provides the necessary educational requirements to the students who wish to go into ministerial training or any type of training for that matter. And so Artios can furnish us with the educational aspect. And of course, the Ministerial Council can provide documents based on what we are able to complete at Artios. There is a course at Artios which is, I guess, the entry course really. I've taken this course. It's a fantastic course, and I want to encourage that, especially if we're in leadership. And when I talk about leadership, I'm talking about your ministry leader, especially if you're a ministry leader or anything like that. It's a great course to take. And so I want to encourage us to start thinking about taking that course and beyond at Artios. One of the things that we have to, that our job as leadership to do is to equip the congregation, equip the church, the saints, for the work of the ministry. And so this is a way in which we can begin to do that. Okay, so I'm going to show you. I'm going to start with a word of prayer to open up our evening session, and then we're going to watch a video on the course. It's called Essentials of Vibrant Leadership. All right, let's pray. Father, we come before you again, and we thank you, Heavenly Father, for your grace, your mercy, and loving kindness towards us as we have gathered once more to study and to learn in order to be more effective at that which you've called us to. We ask you to be in our midst. We ask you to take control. We ask you to direct the speaker and direct the hearers, oh God, that we will hear even beyond the words that will be spoken. That we will not just hear, but we will understand. And that we will not just understand, but we will become doers of that which we learned today. So Father, we ask that your Spirit will indwell us and be with us today. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we're going to show you a video introducing this course at Artios. And at the end of the video, I'll ask Brother Israel to come forward.
Are you a leader? Most people have a gut reaction to that question. For a few people, the response would be, yeah, I'm a leader. But for many people, the reaction would be, no way, not me. But what if I told you that following Jesus makes you a leader? There's this great story about a guy running through a field. He sees a farmer and he runs up to the farmer and he says, hey, have you seen a group of people that were walking through this field a little while ago? I'm their leader. It's been said that a leader with no one following him is just taking a walk. But if you think about it, all of us have someone who's following us. It might be a coworker, it might be a friend at school, a younger sibling, a spouse, a small group, maybe even a church full of people. But all of us have someone who's following us, and that makes us leaders. The leadership guru John Maxwell has said, leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. And all of us are influencing someone every single day. So the real question is not, am I a leader? The real question is, what kind of leader am I? There's this striking sentence in one of Paul's letters where he says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Following Jesus makes us leaders. When you follow Jesus, it's this invitation for others to follow you, and by following you, to follow Jesus. At RDS Christian College, we are committed to equipping leaders. We are passionate about equipping leaders for a vibrant 21st century church. But for the church to be vibrant, the leaders have to be vibrant. You've got to be alive and aware, alert to what God is saying in Scripture, who God is creating you to be, what God is doing in the church, and what he's up to in the world around you. RDS exists to equip leaders to become vibrant leaders, to maximize their influence for the kingdom of God. And it all starts with a course that we've entitled LEA 111, Essentials of Vibrant Leadership. Leaders in this course embark on a 5-week-long journey with other developing leaders and an instructor who's committed to equipping vibrant leaders. The online community enables developing leaders of different ages, genders, backgrounds, experiences, even different countries to come together and explore what vibrant leadership is all about. In this course, developing leaders uncover the unique calling that God has for their lives. They discover the significance and basic tools for knowing and understanding God, Scripture, the church, and culture. We explore an approach to ministry in the church that really embraces the fact that every Christian has been given gifts that the body needs to thrive, and how those gifts can be cultivated. We discover the unique process that God uses to mold spiritual leaders, and we share honestly about how God is at work in our own lives, shaping the characteristics of vibrant leadership. We look at the power of vision in leadership and what it means to truly join God in his mission to redeem and restore all of creation. It's this huge and exciting course that allows us to dip our toes into the ocean of leadership development. It's also an invitation to continue on into one of RDS's leadership certificate or degree programs. It's this powerful tool for anyone who's ready to embrace the challenge of becoming a vibrant leader. And I mean anyone. We've worked hard to make this course and all of our programs financially responsible, so you finish your degree without any student debt. Flexible, so you can continue to lead in the context where God has you right now. And focused, so that every book you read, every assignment you complete, every discussion you have with your teacher and classmates, everything you do with RDS is committed to the single goal of equipping you to be a vibrant leader in today's church and world. Registration for the upcoming term is open right now at rdscollege.org. You can begin the journey toward becoming a vibrant leader in just a few weeks. Join us as we pursue a vibrant 21st century church through equipping vibrant leaders.
Thank you, Pastor Steinmetz. If you ever want to be really uncomfortable, talk to a camera for 4 minutes. Welcome back. Get some lunch? Yes. I have, not really sure how to say this, I was subjected to racism over the lunch break. I was seated at a table with another pastor about my age, about the same amount of hair, and a shared love of Jamaican food. But he was given a fish and I was given chicken. And I can't help but think.
Now you know.
Way to fix that.
In the Roman Empire, in the time of Christ, the Roman Empire ruled the Western world. If you've ever seen on a map, it stretched from the Middle East through Southern Europe, across Northern Africa, and was expanding day after day. Expanding what they called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, supposedly great prosperity and peace and everything wonderful for everyone that they conquered and stole their land from. And it was wonderful and peaceful for some of the richest people, for some of the most powerful people. But as they would spread their kingdom throughout the world, they had messengers that would go into the cities. They had These people who their whole job was to run from city to city shouting out messages. They didn't have internet, they didn't have email, they didn't have cable news, they didn't have mass communication. So their mass communication was, let's send these messengers running to the cities. And as they ran to the cities, they typically were announcing one of two things, either victory or visitation. So victory was, hey, our armies have marched on this city and we've conquered it and it's part of the Roman Empire now. We've had a war with this group of people and we beat them, and so now the kingdom has grown and now we're going to be benefited by their resources. It was announcements that the Romans had won another battle, won another war, conquered another land, expanded the kingdom. The other common announcement was one of visitation. That is, they would come and they would say, the emperor is coming. The conquering general is coming. Caesar is on his way. And they'd say, make the city ready. Get ready for the king to come. He's coming, and when he comes, you need to come out of the city and cheer for him and celebrate his arrival and then usher him back into the city with you, because when he shows up, that's the embodiment of the Roman Empire right here in your city. So this is what they would do. And in the Greek language, which the Romans spoke, they had a word for these messages. The word was euangelion. Euangelion. It meant good news. It's the Greek word that we translate evangelism. When Paul spoke about the mission of the church, how we join God's mission, the word he used wasn't one he made up. It wasn't a church word. It wasn't a word that people used in connection with religious activity. When Paul spoke of evangelism, when the writers of the New Testament talked about preaching good news, when Jesus preached the gospel of the kingdom of God, the good news of the kingdom, so gospel, evangelism, the Greek word is euangelion. It is this word that meant going out into the world and announcing the victory of the kingdom and the soon coming visitation of the king. This is the word. This is the gospel. This is evangelism. To go into this kingdom of God that is spreading throughout the world into a kingdom of darkness and tell people the good news that God has won a victory over sin and death, and that Jesus, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, is on his way to town. That's the gospel. That's evangelism. And so we want to talk about approaches to evangelism. We want to talk about this calling that we've been given to be sowers that sow seed. And because we live in a very different world than the one that Jesus lived in, these farming metaphors don't always connect. But he describes something that was very common, very popular, well known to the people of his time. That you would go out, and the way that you would plant your crops, you would toss the seeds out in handfuls on the ground. And some of it would land on good ground and you'd get a good harvest and growth. Some would land on rocky ground and it would start to grow, but the roots wouldn't go down, it would die. Some of it would fall among thorns and it would get choked out by the weeds. Some of it would fall on the road and never sprout. You had different results from the seed that you scattered. But in any event, you were called to scatter that seed. And Jesus uses this as one of many metaphors for taking the message of the kingdom. I want to tell you a very bizarre story. It's a true story. You can actually read the article yourself on livescience.com. It's called What Will Future Humans Look Like? It's an older article. It's 7 years old now, but it's an unbelievable story. So let me read a quick excerpt from this article. It really happened. 6 generations of inbreeding spanning the years 1800 to 1960, 160 years of inbreeding, caused an isolated population of humans living in the hills of Kentucky to become blue-skinned. This is an artist's representation of one of the families in the town. The startlingly blue people, all descendants of a French immigrant named Martin Fugate, and still living near his original settlement on the banks of Troublesome Creek when hematologists studied them in the 1960s. turned out to have a rare blood condition called methemoglobinemia. I'm sure anyone who knows anything about medicine will correct my pronunciation later. In the 1960s, these people were discovered in the hills of Kentucky. And if you're not from the States or not familiar with Kentucky, that's the least surprising thing about the story. That you could come across people who've been living in the hills for 160 years and no one ever talked to them before. This is what Kentucky's like. Be careful. A recessive gene was pairing with itself to change the molecular composition of their blood, making it brown as opposed to red, which tinted their skin blue. The hematologist's attempt to trace the history of the mutant gene revealed a gnarly Fugate family tree, contorted by many an intermarriage between first cousins, aunts and nephews, and the like over the generations. Dennis Stacy, whose great-great-grandfather on both his mother's and father's side was the same person, Henry Fugate, offered a simple explanation for the rampant inbreeding. Here's what he said. In the old days in eastern Kentucky, there was no roads. No roads. No roads. So this family of people, immigrants from France, settling in these hills, because there were no roads, instead of building roads, they just kept marrying each other and living this isolated life, blind to the world around them. And after 160 years of this, not only were they almost all dead and gone, but they were deformed genetically by reproducing the same broken DNA and causing their skin to turn blue. When I read this, it stuck to me because of how close a picture, how clear an image it is for our tendency as the people of God to isolate ourselves, to become inbred, to not build the roads to connect us to the world around us, and instead to inbreed and become deformed because there's no roads and because we refuse to build it. Evangelism is about building those roads. Christ commands us to build those roads. We're commanded to take the gospel to the whole world. I sometimes hear the saying in our churches, we have the truth, and if they want it, they can come and get it. I call that the anti-Great Commission. It is the exact opposite of what Jesus commands. We're not told to sit and wait for the world to come to us. Understand this might come as a shock to you. There is no place in the New Testament where Jesus commands the community to come to church. But repeatedly, he tells the church to go to the community. We have to build the roads. It's our job to build the bridges. And I want to talk to you today about approaches for building those bridges as an entire congregation, as individual ministries, whether it's the men's ministry, the youth ministry, whatever, and as individuals and families. And building those roads starts with two major shifts in thinking. The first major shift that we're going to see over and over again is from an inward mentality to an outward mentality. What is the focus? And I don't mean what do you think the focus should be. I don't mean can you answer the questions right about what our priorities should be or who we care about. But actually based on our actions and activities, based on the money we spend, based on the schedule we keep, based on the life we live, are we focused inwardly as a church or outwardly? Are we focused inwardly as a ministry or outwardly? Are we focused inwardly as individuals and families or outwardly? So that's the first shift, is from inward to outward. The next is from small and stagnant to growing and dynamic. Pastor Andy Stanley, who's the son of very famous Pastor Charles Stanley, pastors a church in Atlanta, Georgia. Andy Stanley says, your church is perfectly designed to give you the results you're getting. Your church is perfectly designed to give you the results you're getting. And that's significant because so often we're not happy with the results, but we're unwilling to change the design. We say we should be able to use this broken design that has yielded small and dysfunctional results, but we want to use that design to get big, growing, dynamic results. But it doesn't work. If we want to change the results, we have to change the design. So let's look at changing the results, changing the design from a congregational standpoint, a ministry standpoint, and an individual standpoint. Before we jump in, let me tell you two things. Number one, anybody who wants this PowerPoint, the PowerPoint I showed this morning, there's no limitation on that. If you want it, give me your email address, I'll send it to you. So don't feel like you have to copy down a bunch of stuff that's on the screen. You can request this from me. I'm happy to send it to you. I'm happy to send you as many resources as you want or can handle. The other thing is, we are going to try very hard to save time here for some Q&A, some interaction. With a group this size, not everybody is going to ask a question. That would take, just question and answer would take 5 hours with a group this size. But we are going to try to save some time to jump in and ask some questions. So if you have questions and things, thoughts that come up, write them down, take a note on your phone, and when we get to that point, if we haven't covered that yet, please bring that up and help me fill in some of the gaps. So how do we move toward becoming a missional church, church-wide, I'm thinking of? And it's important for you to hear church-wide instead of just your leadership team tomorrow or just your elders and pastors last night, because while they can set the tone and they can make some decisions and they can lead the way, you have to follow them. The whole church has to be committed. And so I'm excited to see probably about 75% of the people we had this morning are back here this afternoon. That's awesome, because that's enough critical mass for you as a congregation to move together in some good directions. As you move in those directions, I really want to encourage you to take it a step at a time and to practice 3 Ps. Since I'm a pastor, I have to alliterate, I have to start a bunch of words with the same letter. The 3 Ps for taking your steps, okay? So as you take these steps, first of all, be patient. Be patient with yourselves, be patient with others, be patient with the congregation. Sam, you can go ahead and advance the slide. Practice patience as you're going along. You are not going to cross the river and become a missional church in one step. You're not going to develop church-wide programs in a week or a day or a month. You're not going to perfect those programs in 6 months or a year. You are going to be taking step after step after step. Some of those steps are going to be slippery. Some of those steps are going to end up in the water. Some of those steps you're going to fall and scratch your head. And you get up and you take another step. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with the process. Now, that's not an excuse to be apathetic and not to move. Don't be patient with sitting around. Be patient with moving forward. So first is patience, then it's practice. Practice, practice, practice. The things I'm going to share with you, a lot of them are practical and specific examples of things that we're doing in our church, that we're doing in our ministries, that we're doing in our homes, that we've seen working in other places, that you can read about in books. But none of those things start out clean and polished. Everything we started to do the first time we did it, it wasn't great. The second time we did it, we tweaked some things, adjusted, it was a little bit better. The third time, it got better. So patience and practice. Keep practicing, keep adapting, keep growing. And then the third is perseverance. Stick to it when it gets hard. If you actually are committed to changing, it is going to get hard and you are going to have incredible resistance and not a small amount of pain. You're going to have relationships that are tried and tested. You're going to have people who are committed to the old way of doing things, regardless of what the Bible says, regardless of what Jesus commissions us to do, regardless of what your leadership decides, regardless of what the majority of the people in your church are willing and excited to do, you will have people that will dig their heels in and refuse to move forward. You will have disappointments, you will have frustrations, you will have situations where your membership, you told me to be honest, Richard, your membership is likely to dip as you attempt to change before it grows. So if you say, well, we'll change if it works, and by works we mean if we see 20 new members in the first 6 months, or 10 new members in the first year, there's a pretty good chance you'll actually see a dip in membership before you see growth. This is what perseverance is needed for. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult. There's going to be resistance for at least a couple reasons. The two biggest ones are the flesh and the devil. These are not new to you. your flesh will resist momentum toward the kingdom of God, toward the mission of God. That's why so often our churches and churches of all denominations sit back and don't engage in the mission of God, because we are being run by the desires of our flesh. So when you attempt to move in the direction of the Spirit, the flesh will challenge you, and the devil will challenge you, because this is a life and death battle between two kingdoms. A kingdom of life and light, and a kingdom of darkness and death. And they are at war with each other. Now, when you're hiding in the back ranks and not on the front lines, you don't feel a lot of that intensity of the battle. But as you start to move into it, you will start to get some of that intensity. You will start to get some of that direct conflict. So take the steps, but be patient, practice, and persevere through hardship. So what do the steps look like congregation-wide? I want to share with you a model. I didn't come up with this, but I was so struck by it, I wanted to share it, because I think that it helps us kind of look at a spectrum of how churches interact with the community around them. So first, a couple quick terms. When I talk about the church in its relationship to the community, I'm talking about specifically this congregation, and more specifically, the building you're meeting in. So hopefully you know by now, from every pastor in the world saying it like they were the first one to say it, the church isn't the building, it's the people. Okay, that's true. I'm not disagreeing with that. But when I talk about the relationship of your church to your community, I am talking about the community that your building is located. Because in a sense, the collection of you as a people are represented to your community by this place, by this space, by this location and this structure and the activities that you do here. So when I talk about church in community, I'm talking about this building and the people who fill it and the surrounding neighborhoods, the surrounding area around this building. So there's three major approaches to the community that churches take, and you'll see as we go through them that you want to be moving away from this first one and toward the last one. And I'd be interested to have some feedback about where you guys are right now after you see the three descriptions. So the first is church in community. Church in community. This is probably the most common approach that churches take in the United States and Canada. Does not desire to influence the community. May be described as a fortress holding the outside world back and invest nearly all of its various resources on its own members. Okay, so this is a church that says, yeah, we're meeting in this space, but we are not concerned with what's happening outside of this building. We're here for us. We actually are trying to keep our distance from the people that are outside. And we're going to invest all of our money, all of our time, all of our resources, all of our gifting into what happens in this building. And we're not really interested in what's going on outside. You say, Israel, the way you describe that sounds really bad. Again, this is the majority of churches, including the majority of Church of God Seventh Day. It takes up space in the neighborhood. So this building is taking up square footage. It takes up space in your neighborhood. The members commute into the community for services and meetings and then leave again. So this is what we call a destination church. A church where the facility, maybe at one point it made sense. You know, for instance, the first church I pastored was in Kansas City. That building had been bought about 60 years before I went to pastor there. When that building was bought, it was a very different city, and the people who attended that congregation lived close to that building. But a few decades of gentrification and white flight, and the people who attended, I know what those words meant. A few decades of gentrification and white flight, and no one who attended that church lived within 30 minutes of that building. So what had happened by the time I went to pastor there is that it was a church facility where everyone who attended drove 30 to 90 minutes to get there. And they were predominantly retirement age and older, white, middle-class people. And the neighborhood that had grown up around the church in the 60 years that had been there was predominantly young, black, and poor. And the people driving in from all of these suburbs to get to this church had no relationship, no connection, no investment, nothing with that neighborhood. I bought a house about 2 minutes from the church building, which I ended up being very thankful for because it allowed me to try to connect with the community. It also posed the problem that I was then about 45 minutes away from all the members that I was supposed to visit. This is typical. This is how most American and Canadian churches are. The members drive to the building for services and meetings, then they leave again. Part of what is sort of unique and dynamic about churches that grow, particularly rapidly growing churches that you see, that go from 50 people to 150 to 750 to megachurch, which is 2,000 or above. Almost universally, those churches are community-based churches, meaning the people who are attending and increasing the attendance so rapidly live within 5 to 10 minutes of the building. Now, I don't know statistics for like religious saturation of Hamilton or the greater Toronto area, but like in San Antonio, where I live, there's 8 churches on my block. Whoa. There's 3 of them that meet in my building, because we rent to a church that rents to another church. I kid you not. So San Antonio is a city that is oversaturated with church buildings. And so for a person who's looking to start going to church, who hasn't gone, to them the thought of driving past 100 churches to get to a different one only makes sense if there's something unbelievably awesome about that church. Now for you, because you grew up in it, if you grew up in it, for you it's, well, I'm driving to that church because that's where the right doctrine is, or because that's where my family is, or because that's where I grew up. But your neighbor, who you would have to give very detailed directions to get here, and they'd have to pass 20 churches on the way, why would they do that? So community churches tend to grow because people are close enough to them that they already know where it is and it has some connection. But that's not typical. What's typical is the building is in a community that it's separated from. The church does not pay taxes and is a net drain on the community. Are churches in Canada non-profit organizations that don't have to pay taxes? That's right? Okay. So that applies here as well. So if you think about it that way, if you have a building in a space in a community and they're not connected to and investing in that community, then they end up being a net drain on that community because they're taking up space and not paying taxes. So they're actually robbing from the community they're in. It's a church on an island. It's a church that has isolated itself out in the middle of nowhere and is surrounded by a moat that no one can cross. Isn't that a great picture? This is actually an ancient church building that was revealed when the water levels in a reservoir in Central America dropped precipitously, and they realized there was a church underwater. But that's the best thing I could come up with for a church being an island. So this is what's typical, a church in a community. The next step from there, the movement from there that you want to take, is being a church to the community. So a church to the community desires to bless and make contributions to the community, which is good. That's the good first step. They want to bless and make contributions to the community, but doing it on their own terms. So they don't desire the community members to influence the church. They say, we're gonna do the blessing, we're going to provide some goods and some services to help the community, but it's a very one-way, one-dimensional relationship. We hand you stuff, and you walk away and say thank you. We're not interested in what you need, want to do, except in the sense of if we can identify a need that we think is a need, we'll try to supply that. But we don't want to partner with the community. It spends some resources in the community, but usually a small percentage of the total budget. So a church that's to the community, again, it's a step in the right direction, but it's typically a small or a series of small incremental steps. So it's a church that goes from saying, yeah, we're a church in the community, and we haven't really cared about our neighborhood. This year, let's budget 0.5% of our budget to do some outreach stuff, to give away some food, some clothes, whatever, and that'll help us be more community friendly. Now, as I'm saying this, you might get the feeling of, oh, how inadequate, how terrible. Remember, it's incremental. You're not likely to jump from 0% invested in your community to 20% invested in your community in one fiscal year. It would be almost impossible for your church to survive that kind of shift. You have to take the incremental steps. So a church that's to the community, they might be headed toward being a church that's with the community, or headed backward toward being in the community, or just stuck in place. And if you're stuck in place or moving backward, that's bad. But if this is a sign of movement and trajectory in the right direction, then being a church to the community is certainly better than being in it, and you can be on your way to being with it. A church like this limits or suppresses the influence of the community stakeholders in its planning or assessment processes. All that means is, when you decide what you do and how you do it and when you're doing it, you're not asking anyone outside of your church for input on that. You're just, when you sit down and write out your calendar for the year, you write out what works for you. When you create your goods and services and products that you share with the community, you think of what you think they could use. And so in doing that, in staying inward focused, you're limiting or suppressing the influence of the other community stakeholders. By community stakeholders, we're talking about educators, we're talking about other nonprofits, we're talking about homeowners associations, we're talking about law enforcement, we're talking about political groups, we're talking about all those who have an interest and a commitment in your neighborhood. So a church to the community takes up space in the neighborhood, sometimes sharing it with the community. Sometimes a church that's to the community will provide their space or open up their space to other groups in the community. They perform programs and services that benefit some community residents, typically targeted at the poor or maybe targeted at a specific affinity group. We're going to do something for moms of young children or something like that. It does not pay taxes and is a net neutral presence and influence in the community. So they're doing some things that kind of offset the fact that they're taking up space and not paying taxes, but it probably is just balancing out. One example from my experience that makes me think of a church to the community was I was pastoring a congregation, and we started doing food and clothing giveaway. And my vision of what that could look like was that this could be kind of a doorway to getting to know people, to getting to actually share some life with them, to getting the sense that they felt like we were there and cared about them and our community was open to them, they were welcome. I envisioned all that happening. What ended up happening was we just provided a service to other people. So we worked hard. And the church that I was with, the people worked hard, and they cared, and they gave what they knew to give. And we ended up getting donations from other community members and whatnot. We had more than enough food, more than enough clothes. We were serving, we do it one Sabbath afternoon a month after service, and we got to where we were serving about 100 distinct people each month. They'd come through. But what would happen is they would come through our fellowship hall and work their way through these tables of food and clothing, packing up their bags. And our people who had worked so hard and sacrificed so much to get it ready would stand against the wall with their arms crossed and watch. Sometimes they'd talk to each other about the people who were going through the line, or talk to each other about anything else they felt like talking about. And I'm out there among the tables, greeting people, helping them pack their bag, carry it out to the car, and I'm looking around like, what is happening? But the mentality was, we are helping them, we're giving to them, we're serving them, we're showing them love. This is outreach. But it was simply being to the community. We were the ones serving, they were the ones taking. There was no mutuality in it. There was no partnership in it. This brings us to the last mode of thinking, or the last way of relating between church and community. Desires, this is a church with the community. So it was church in community, church to the community, and church with the community. A church with the community desires to influence the community and desires community stakeholders to influence it. So this means I don't just want to have my church impact the community around me. I want my church impacted by that community. I want them to have something to say to us. I want us to learn from them. I want us to benefit from and partner with them. I want us to know what their priorities are, what their agendas are, so that that can become part of our planning process. A church with the community spends significant resources, time, talent, goods in the community, and looks to unleash gifts, skills, and resources already present in the community. So spending the resources, that means, taking it from 1% of the budget to 5% or 10% or whatever becomes a substantial amount. But then the other part of it is saying, okay, there's only so much we can do by spending money and throwing money at issues in our community. There's a lot more we could do if we utilize and unleash the gifts and the opportunities and the resources that are surrounding us already. So here's a quick illustration of the difference between the two. Being a church to the community would just give people, you'd spend 3% of your budget to give people a meal. Okay, for the person getting that meal, that might mean the world to them. I'm not criticizing it, and it may be an incremental step you take. But a church to the community might spend 3% of the budget and give some people a meal. A church with the community might interact and connect enough with their community to find out that a lot of the people coming to get meals in their community are coming to get meals in the community from a church because they're at very low-paying jobs and they don't have any skills to get a promotion. And if they could learn to type, if they could learn to use the Microsoft Office suite, if they could learn how to use the internet to send and receive emails, if they could learn a few basic computer skills, they could get $1.50 an hour, $2 an hour raise at their job by moving from their current position into another position. Or they could get another position altogether if they learned how to write a resume. And so that church says, okay, instead of spending 3% on food to feed people who are going to be hungry the next day, let's spend 7% to create a small computer lab and offer free courses on job training and computer skills, so that we're equipping these people to unleash the talents and resources and abilities they already have so that they can be a blessing to the community as well, rather than us simply providing the handout. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. The church with the community utilizes planning and assessment processes that are influenced by both churches and community stakeholders and makes decisions based upon the impact desired by church and neighbors. So when you're planning an event that is going to be open to the community, a church to the community, just again, they plan that event, what's our schedule look like, what do we have, what do we want to do? A church with the community develops partnerships with other groups and people in the community and says, hey, we'd like to do this particular event. What could it look like if you were involved? What would you like to see happen? I will share in a little bit a specific example of how our church moved from a to the community approach in our big outdoor events, increasingly to a with the community approach. But it's partnering with the community. It serves and develops the community for reasons and with methods that bring transformational impact to the community and church alike. Serves and develops the community for reasons and with methods that bring transformational impact to the community and church alike. So instead of saying, we want our lives to be transformed by the gospel for the people in this building, we're saying, with the people in this building, in partnership with the people outside this building, we want the lives of everyone in our community to be transformed. It's a convener and servant to the community. That is, it's a place that initiates things that are community-wide. It brings together different players from the community, adding value to residents and the community as a whole. Some of this might sound very abstract. Let me give one so simple, concrete example of this. I recently, after living in my neighborhood, owning my home for 5 years, I finally got around to attending a homeowners association meeting. You guys have homeowners HOAs up here?
Yeah, a condo.
So I finally went to a meeting, and because out of 180 homes in my development, there's 5 old people there, I got elected to the board my first. I made the mistake of asking an intelligent question. You should be on the board. But what I found out from that one meeting is that this homeowners association is renting space from a public library to use a meeting room that they are then unceremoniously kicked out of at 9 o'clock when the library closes. And I said to our HOA president, I'm like, you guys can just use our church whenever you want. You don't have to pay for it. We're not going to kick you out at 9. It's a weeknight meeting that happens once a quarter. that sort of simple thing, that creates the church being a convener for the neighborhood, because we have called together groups of people who care about the neighborhood to come and work together in our space with our resources. It adds value. So it becomes a net contributor to the community, even though it doesn't pay taxes. So this is, if you want to think of a goal and a movement, most churches are a church in a community. Disconnected, completely inward focused. Churches that start to make some momentum become a church to the community. They begin to connect and they start providing services, but they're still very much independent of the community. A church with the community becomes fully engaged and partnered with the other community members. And I think about a couple things, a couple of illustrations come to mind. The first is learning to crawl and then walk and then run. It's unlikely and rare that you see a child who's crawling one day and running the next. Every once in a while you'll see a kid who does it. Every once in a while you'll see a church who does it. Usually though, what you see is a kid who's crawling and then they learn to walk very unsteadily, and after they get down walking, then they get running. So if you look at crawling as in a community, walking as to a community, and running as with a community, I would expect a church to learn to crawl before it learns to walk. The other metaphor that comes to mind are these two illustrations Jesus used to describe our role in the world. The salt of the earth and the light of the world. And he talks about how if the salt loses its flavor, it becomes useless. He talks about how a light could be hidden and therefore be useless. When you think about salt and light, what good is salt in a salt shaker? As long as it stays in the shaker, what purpose does it serve? I want you to increasingly think of this building as a salt shaker. Shake it, shake it, shake it. Shake it, shake it, shake it. Yeah. Turn it upside down and spill it out on something, okay? While you're in the shaker, you know what? There's salt sitting in a cupboard in a shaker in my house right now. That's okay. It's okay for it to stay there between meals. During meal times, it needs to get out and mix in with the food. Salt only does its work when it blends with food. So it's okay to be in the shaker when that's the appropriate thing. It's not okay to stay in the shaker all the time. It's not okay to only be the salt when you're in the shaker. It's much more significant that you get shaken out and mixed with the food to create flavor. We are the salt, we are the flavor of the earth. That doesn't work if we're not mixed in with the people of the earth. The other one is light. Light has this incredible property that light fills all dark places. So if you expose darkness to light, the light infiltrates and fills up the darkness. The only way to keep something dark is to cut it off from light, to wall it off from light. Darkness doesn't spread, light spreads. So we're called to be the light of the earth. And what Jesus warns us about is the stupidity and the futility of putting a basket over our light, which causes the light not to do its job and allows darkness to reign outside of that basket. Once again, I want you to think of this building like a basket. While you're in it, your light is not shining in the world. Now, am I saying don't come to church? No. There are things that we do when we assemble together as the body that we can't do separately. There are things that we are called to be and do that we must do as a united body that are best done as a large group, that are best done in settings like this. This is a good and necessary part of what it means to be the church. But this is not all that it means to be the church. This is not the thing you check off and say, well, I was a Christian this week because I went to church. Now I'll go live my unbelieving life for 6 days. This is a place you come to be equipped and prepared to be sent out into the world as salt and light. And then you come back a week later to celebrate what God has done in and through you in the world and be equipped and prepared to live another week. This is a mission post where soldiers are brought back for training, for healing. for encouragement. I apologize that I keep being distracted by this. It's my wife calling me repeatedly. A little scary, because I think she knows I'm teaching. But as I tell my church members who want to call me at 2 a.m. with an emergency, if it's an emergency, call 911. You can use that, Richard. So, I've been encouraged greatly in the last couple of years by the writings and the teaching of a man named Reggie McNeil. Reggie McNeil is a missional leadership specialist with the Missional Network, one of the most influential and best, most practical voices regarding the missional movement in North America. And his encouragement for churches is to make this shift, and Richard mentioned it before, from church-centric to kingdom-centric. To realize that the church is not the center of all things. That the church is a tool and a group of people that are at work to expand God's kingdom. Another way of saying this is to move from a church-centric to a mission-centric view. The quote that just grabs a hold of me and makes this so clear comes from Christopher Wright's book, The Mission of God's People. It is not so much the case that God has a mission for his church in the world as that God has a church for his mission in the world. Mission was not made for the church. The church was made for mission, God's mission. Now understand the significance of what he's pointing out. We tend to think of the church as central. We tend to think God created the church. And then God needed the church to keep busy with stuff. So he gave us fellowship, and he gave us worship, and he gave us evangelism, and he gave us service. He gave us all these tasks for the church to do. In that case, the church is primary, and the stuff we do is just the stuff we do. Wright is pointing out, no. God didn't make a church and then come up with a mission. God had a mission in place already. And so he made a church to join him in that mission. We were created for that purpose. When we don't join the mission of God, we cease to legitimately be able to call ourselves the church. We can say we're the church of Jesus Christ. We can say we're the church of God. But look, if you're not following Jesus into the world, you can't follow Jesus. Because that's where he's going. That's where he's going. Does he come in a special way and meet us here when we assemble? Absolutely. But when he leaves this place, he leaves with you. And he expects you to go out into the world. Now, that phrase, that Great Commission, go therefore into the world, it's actually not a verb. There's no verb in the Greek that says, go do that. It's more literally rendered, as you are going. Which is to say, Jesus was speaking to a group of people that he knew the course of human life would cause them to go out into the world. You can't isolate yourself from the world. You can't close yourself off. There are those who attempt it. It's actually identified as a sickness in Japan now. There's young people that literally hide inside their room, but they have to be facilitated by a parent that will slip food under the door. And even when you try to isolate yourself, you can't. You are going to relate. You are going to be in the world. So as you're going, fulfill the commission. So let's look at 3 key changes to get from the church-centered mentality to the kingdom-centered mentality, or mission-centered. The first one is to change the story. It's time to change the story. It's time to change the narrative. We have a narrative. We have a story in our heads about who we are. And when we get thinking about growth, when we get thinking about God's kingdom, when we get thinking about Jesus' work and the gospel, a lot of times the narrative that pops into our head is, I want to build a great church. I want my church to grow. I want this church to have better programs and better finances and a better building and better people. I want to build a great church. That's a very church-centric way of thinking, and it drives certain behaviors. A kingdom-centric way of thinking changes that narrative. It says God is at work in the world, and we get to be a part of it. So a major part of the shift is, where is God working? What is God up to? If your answer to that question is, well, God is primarily at work here on Sabbath, then everything you do is going to be about what happens here on Sabbath. But if your answer to that question is, God is at work in all times and in all places, and he is on mission out there, then you're going to start spending your time and your money as a congregation and your focus and your priorities joining God in his mission. That's the first shift. The second shift is changing the scorecard, or how we measure success. This focuses on what we celebrate. The church-centered model that we're accustomed to celebrates what we do in our weekly service. Was it a good service? Did you enjoy the music? How was the class? How was that sermon? Didn't our worship team do great? Everything we celebrate revolves around what we do in this space. But what if we started celebrating our capacity not to attract, but to send? What if we started celebrating our capacity to impact people that aren't in this building once a week? So then, a more important number than how many are attending on Sabbath morning would be the number that are invited to this space outside of Sabbath, that use this space, and by using this space, receive a connection point to the love and the people of God because they've come to this space for something else. That's a huge shift for us to think. I would get more excited. So in my church, we have a school supply giveaway each fall. That's a to the community practice, which I'll explain a little bit how it's shifting to a with the community practice. But we have a school supply giveaway. And each year we track, and we've been able to serve a larger number of students. So I pastor a congregation of around 75 to 100 in attendance, similar in size to Access. But this last fall, we served 325 students school supplies. That number is a number I am more interested in. That on one day, 500 people in our neighborhood, including 325 children, walked through our building and received a point of connection and love and concern from our congregation. That's a more significant number to me than the 75 to 100 who attend regularly. That's something to celebrate. It's something to celebrate when we send people out. So for instance, when people are not sitting in the pews because they're at a mall or their kid's baseball game or sleeping in, I'm not very happy about that. But when people aren't sitting in the pews because they are engaged in kingdom work elsewhere, that's something we celebrate. We celebrate so-and-so is not here today because they had the opportunity to go and do this thing. We have lost some of our best leaders in the last couple of years. One of them, Michael and Bettina Mancha, just incredible. He's a graphic design background, did a bunch of communications and social media stuff for us. They both were heavily involved in the worship ministry. He was a speaker at times when I was out of town. Incredible couple, 3 awesome kids, core family of the church. At 37 years old, he finally answered God's call to become a pastor that he had known God had placed on his life since he was in high school. And they moved away to pastor the church at Seventh Day in Eugene, Oregon. Huge loss to our church, but we celebrate the sending capacity that a church in Oregon knew enough about our congregation to say, we want a pastor to come from your congregation to help us do the things that you're doing, to help us move in that direction. That's an incredible thing to get to celebrate. Changing the scorecard is about not being so focused on celebrating what happens here, but on what happens here and elsewhere, how that is expanding the kingdom and spreading kingdom life into the world. So attendance at outreach events versus attendance Sabbath morning. The money, oh, here's another one, money. We tend to celebrate, I shared with the elders and the pastors last night, we tend to celebrate the three Baptist measures, the three B's, budgets, buildings, and butts and seats. Budgets, buildings, and butts and seats. This is what we celebrate. What if instead of celebrating the money we take in, we celebrate the money we give out? That instead of the focus being on how much money can we draw in to pay the bills, to keep the show going week after week, what if the focus became, and the celebration became, how much money were we able to share? What did that money do outside of this building? Believe it or not, it's been my experience in the last several years there at our congregation and in what I read and see and hear about elsewhere. People give to vision. People give to growth. They give to movement. They give to outward focused things. A lot of times we have an inward focused church and we wring our hands about the low giving involvement. Why don't more people give? Why don't more people give regularly? Why don't people give more? But if all they're giving to is keeping the show running week after week, where's the motivation? And so typically the only people that give in a church like that are people over 60 who were raised in a time period where they were told you must give to God. You can't rob from God. If you give to God, the blessings of heaven will open up. They have been trained from childhood to look at giving as an obligation before God, that He'll judge you if you don't do it, and He'll reward you if you do. And so many of our churches are completely supported by a handful of retired folks. And younger people who aren't being given that message, and don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying that message is a good one. I don't think that's the basis for cheerful giving that Scripture provides for us. But they're not given that message, and they haven't been given an alternative message, and they're wondering, why would I give more money to just perpetuate the status quo week after week? But you start saying, you know what? God has called us to build. God has called us to grow. He's called us to serve. He's called us to connect with and resource our community. And here's what your money is going to. I've seen people give to that. People want to give to that, not just in money, but in their time, in their resources, in their service. So we change what we celebrate. People we connect with versus people process. So here's another step. First step is me as a pastor getting more excited about and celebrating 325 students being served school supplies versus 75 or 80 people showing up on Sabbath morning. The next step beyond that is celebrating the people that I was able to connect with and that other members of the congregation were able to connect with versus just the people that were served. So 325 people come through the line, that's one thing. But how many of those people, here's how I measured it this past year. How many of the people in line gave me a hug when they saw me? Because if they gave me a hug when they saw me, that meant it was at least my second encounter with them. It was at least the second time that they knew that I loved them and cared about them on God's behalf. And so if they recognize me, when I see the spark in their eyes, and I recognize them kind of, it's been a while, whatever, I see a lot of people, but when I see the spark of recognition in their eyes, and I give them a hug and say, it's so nice to see you again, which that's my line. It's a little pastor trick. Don't say nice to meet you. It's the most dangerous thing you can say. Say it's so good to see you again. Or just it's so good to see you. You don't even have to say it again. But I measured that. How many people connected with somebody in the congregation rather than just being served and pushed through the line? So we celebrate those things. So these three changes: change the narrative, change the scorecard, and then change the stewardship, the leadership agenda. Silence yourself, please. That's really change the leadership agenda, or the stewardship. Here's the question I want you to think of. As a church, particularly as the leaders of the church, but as the church as a whole, who are you responsible for as the church? Who are you responsible for? Are you responsible for the church, or are you responsible for the world? So, who recognizes this word, ecclesia? Anybody?
Word.
What's it mean?
Word.
It's what we translate into church. Do you know what it means literally? Called out ones. Those who are called out. Okay? This is also not a religious word. It's not a word Jesus made up or the apostle made up. It was a word that was being used in the Roman Empire. An ecclesia was a group of people who were called out of one setting to represent and oversee the other people in that setting. So an ecclesia was not this group that got separated from the bigger group and stayed by themselves and dealt with their own issues. It was similar to, one form of an ecclesia at that time would be like a city council. So a city council was a form of an ecclesia. They were representing the city. They were responsible for the city. Now you guys, within your church, every church has its own called out ones within the church. In this church you call them your church board. I want to ask you something. If your church board had on their agenda only items related to the church board, would they be doing their job?
No.
If they sat in a room and talked about how do we make our board meetings better? How do we increase our leadership capacity as board members? Now, do you want them to do some of that? Sure. But why are they doing those things? Why are they getting better at being board members? Why are they having better, more productive board meetings? Why are their board meetings more comfortable? Why do they have more money to talk about in their board meetings? All for the service of the church, right?
Yeah.
Because they're the church board. They represent the interests of the church. They don't exist in that board meeting for the sake of the board. They exist in the board meeting for the sake of the church. If we recognize ourselves as the ecclesia, as the called out ones from the world, then we need to recognize that our agenda, our priorities, what we do, should not be all about us. But when it's about us, it's so that we can better serve them. We are the ecclesia for the world. We have been called out to provide care and oversight to the world around us. Unfortunately, throughout Christian history, we've forgotten that and decided that we were called out from the world to ignore the world and to leave them alone and to take care of our own stuff, to make sure we had the best programs and the best buildings and the best doctrine and the best behavior. And it became this meeting that was all for the sake of the ecclesia instead of for the sake of the world. Our job as the ecclesia is to partner with God in this transformational process to bring new life and new possibilities to the world, to go from death to life in the world. All right, that's the next picture, Sam. And here's what I want to do. I don't know. I feel like I'm in Jamaica again.
Well, take your sweater off.
And y'all are getting sleepy. We're about to get into specific examples and ideas. Stand up, stretch, say hi to somebody. Get some blood pumping. If someone next to you is sleeping, poke them in the ribs. Don't go anywhere. Don't leave. We're sitting down in 30 seconds. It's just to wake you up. Richard, are you recording or broadcasting? All right, let's take our seats again. Let's take our seats again. So, there's a reason why I made you guys sit through a long lecture before giving you a bunch of specific examples. The examples I can give you are just examples. They're examples of things we've done in my home church. Our context is very different than yours. Our church building is located in a neighborhood of homes directly across the street from an elementary school. It's a suburban setting. Our building is located in a economically depressed area that's actually declined over the last few years and now is trying to rebound. We live in a city that's 72% Hispanic. Our city is different. Our setting is different. Our congregation is different. The congregation I pastor is about 90% Hispanic. So we're trying to move in the direction of better representing our community by having a few more gringos, and if we can get like, with the current numbers, if we can get like 2 black folks and 2 Asians, we will be exactly the demographics. So our setting, our context is different. The people we have are different. And the specific leadership passions of our leadership are different. So as I share examples with you, the reason I wanted to lay a foundation first is it's not about the specific examples and activities. What is best for you guys may not be what we have done. But if the ideas and the examples can spark some imagination and give you some ideas, then it's helpful. So let me just talk through a few things we've done. On the next slide, Sam. So this is an example that in some ways was at a ministry level, but it became church-wide. This is a group of middle schoolers and high schoolers. So this is part of our student ministry at our church, which is 6th grade to 12th grade. And we hosted at our church a summer youth conference for the weekend that typically was hosted in a different place, and they needed a new location. So we hosted them. So in that sense, it was congregation-wide that we said, we're going to cancel our regular services and we're going to host 150 teens to come and participate in this conference for the weekend. But instead of them just doing singing and Bible studies and praying and eating, all the stuff that we typically just do when we get together, they said, we're going to go volunteer at the food bank. And so the group of students went out from where they were being equipped to serve at a food bank. If you're thinking in terms of, is that in the community, to the community, or with the community, that's obviously to the community. It's just providing service. But it's a movement in the right direction. This was a vacation Bible school. So this goes to a little bit different level. This is an open to the community invitation for the kids to come. And this is something that is done more in a with the community sense, because in that sense, we are connecting with the elementary school next door to us. We're connecting with various groups in the area, and we're finding out during the summer months, there's a lot of little kids right there in our zip code who are going to be getting into trouble, who might be not eating, who might not have anything to do. Providing a vacation Bible school for a week is a gift to these parents. It's a gift to the community. And it's an opportunity to explicitly teach these children the gospel, share God's love with them, and then draw their families to the church. This was a charity walk that we participated in for several years. It was sparked by the fact that we have several kids in our congregation, including one of my sons, with developmental delays or disabilities. So we have several autistic kids in the church and an autistic young man. And so we went to this charity walk with the Brighton Center that provides for children with developmental disabilities. And we actually, so this is our Love in Action shirt. We actually were the largest group at the walk. So this is a walk with about 2,000 people.
Wow.
And you walk in your groups. And our church was the largest group 2 years in a row. Which, again, it may seem limited in what that is able to accomplish, but when you walk through a walk like that and you have 45 people wearing the same t-shirt, you start to connect with the community. A lot of times you're not going to get to being with the community until you are to the community. You don't just jump into these partnerships, you live into them. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is our school supply giveaway. This is one of our big outdoor events. So these have evolved, and I want to share a little bit about how these have evolved. So the first thing we did, we just served lunch in our parking lot after service one day. We just picked a day, advertised it to the neighborhood as best we could, and served lunch in our parking lot. From there, we started to grow in terms of our vision for it. So the next time around, we started to add other pieces. At this point, let me tell you what we're doing at this point 3 years later. At this point, the Sabbath after Lord's Supper, we have designated Resurrection Sabbath. Not because we think Jesus was always raised on the Sabbath after, but it's the first time we're together as a group after the Lord's Supper. And so we celebrate the resurrection in service that morning, and then afterwards we have a spring fiesta. Fiesta is this big thing at San Antonio, where they're celebrating the Battle of the Flowers and Texas independence and all this. So we throw a spring fiesta. So it's lunch in the parking lot, it's bounce castles, petting zoo, pony rides, stuff white people in Texas like. So again, you have to customize this for your setting, all right? We have added a new element of inviting local businesses to set up booths in our parking lot. Because we have 50 to 150 people from our neighborhood who walk into this event or drive to this event. So giving local businesses on our street exposure to new customers who live right next door to them is a huge gift to those businesses. It's a gift to our community because that's going to increase buying and selling in our neighborhood, which will improve the life of the people in our neighborhood. This building right here, so this is our parking lot. This building is Northern Hills Elementary School. We have a standing agreement with them, and I guess you guys have a similar type of parking agreement. So they can overflow into our parking lot throughout the week. The beauty of it is, a lot of parents drop off and pick up kids. So for an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon, about 200 cars come and go through our parking lot. These are parents of kids who live right next door to us that know our parking lot is an open space for them, where they're welcome to come and go. The trade-off that's beautiful is the school lets us use their parking lot when we overflow. So for an event like this where we're using the parking lot, a lot of it for the event, we have all of our people park in the parking lot across the street so that all of our parking spaces are open to visitors. And so we're partnering with the school in that way, but an even deeper partnership with the school where I have the advantage, the principal of the school is a believer. So he's worked with me to find out what are they allowed to announce for us and not announce for us. So they can't advertise our worship services, but lunch and games in the parking lot, they can advertise. So when we schedule an event like this, we have our people that we contact and people from the community that we've gotten their email addresses, but I send an email with the flyer to the principal of the school, and he sends an email to 680 families, inviting them to our church. I send an email to the homeowners association leader, or the neighborhood association leader of the neighborhood that our church sits in. She sends an email to about 100, 120 homes in the area that are part of the neighborhood association. They are willing and ready and excited to partner with us because in the 4 years we've been in that building, we've built up relationships, we've built up reputation. My battery died. My voice is next. Actually, this shows the battery's still good. I'm good? Okay. So this is an event, and we can talk more about these type of events. But again, I want to say they have grown. We've learned things along the way. We've learned some things that work, some things that don't. And you may or may not be able to reproduce something like this, but if there are similar things you can do, this has become, so we do a spring fiesta and we do a fall festival around Thanksgiving time. Those are the only 2 times in San Antonio when you can be outside. So we have 2 of these big events each year, and the community has come to be excited about them, to depend on them, to come out in large numbers for them. And we will frequently have people that have come to these events that then go on to visit the church on a Sabbath, or even more often than that, we have people that come to these kind of events at our church who don't end up attending our church, but who are then spreading the word about our church through the whole community. So I will routinely meet people who, when they find out what church I go to, they tell me about their friend who I don't know, who is telling them they should visit our church. So the more connections you make, the more partnerships you form, the more momentum you build. This was our school supply giveaway Another food bank opportunity that we have. Go ahead to the next slide. Opening our building, sharing our building has become a very significant thing to us for community purposes and for other churches and events. So this particular service, this wasn't our regular service. If you could see the people on the stage, you'd see they're all teenagers. Or young adults. This was a young adult worship night and conference that we hosted. So we're looking at the building a little differently and saying, instead of this building being for our special purpose once a week or twice a week, our building is a resource in the kingdom of God. How do we use it to the maximum? It breaks my heart that we have such a large facility. So we have a main worship center, an old church building that we renovated into classrooms, and a 3-bedroom house that we use for fellowship hall space. It breaks my heart that it sits empty through the week. Like, why is all this space? Why are all these resources not doing anything except on Saturdays? So using them to the maximum, opening them. If there's a youth conference in town, if there's a young adult conference in town, of course, have the building. Use it for 3 days over the weekend. Our people can come to a service led by young people every once in a while. They can hear a different song and dance to a different beat. Let's see, what else do I want to say here? Okay, next slide. This is the manager of a pharmacy who lives down the street from us. So Rick Warren, the pastor of Saddleback Church out in Southern California, one of the largest churches in the U.S., author of Purpose-Driven Life, Purpose-Driven Church. Rick Warren has written something and repeated it that has really challenged me, that a pastor should know their community better than anybody else. I take that a step further. I think a Christian should know their community better than anybody else. I don't think that's just for pastors. Another thing he said that has challenged me is, if your church moved, how big of a hole would it leave in your neighborhood? Would anyone know you were gone? And how would it affect them if you moved? So as I've been thinking more in these terms, I've been looking for ways to connect in the community. So one way is a grand opening for a new business. So a new pharmacy was opening up down the street from us. They sent out a flyer to our homeowners association. And just so you know, like, these things might sound obvious once they're said, but the church that we purchased the property from had been in that building for 30 years and had never joined the neighborhood association. The church that we shared that, or that we bought that building from, had been there for 30 plus years and had never met the principal of the elementary school next door. And this was a church that grew and outgrew the building, and the reason we got to buy it was they were building a bigger building in another location. This isn't just a growth strategy. This is about a different way of thinking about what we do and why we do it. We found out about this pharmacy grand opening from the homeowners association. And so I went to the grand opening, and I'm there, and I'm meeting the staff. This guy's the owner, this is the manager, this is one of the pharmacists. I'm meeting the staff, and I went to the manager and I said, hey, I pastor a church just down the street here. If you ever want to partner together for community health initiatives or anything you want to do, call me up and let me know, and we'll work together. She was like, that sounds exciting. I don't even know what that means. I never had a church that said that to me. Let me think about that. So she calls me up. Maybe a month or so later, she says, hey, I had an idea. We want to do a flu clinic, like flu shot clinic. Is that something we could potentially host at your church? I said, awesome, let's do it. We advertised it like crazy. We set up for it, we were ready, and this was the only person who came. I'm glad I got the picture of the first person, because she was the only person, and she was a friend of somebody in our congregation. So, we stood there for about 2 hours during the advertised time. And I said to them, I said, you know what? We've been in this neighborhood a couple years longer than you. And, I've told you about, 50, 150, 200, 500 people coming to our building for things. So all those things were free. We were buying them lunch. We had bounce castles. We had stuff for them. You're charging for flu shots. So I said, I don't want us to give up. I don't want us to be discouraged. But I do think, like, you could help build, you're a business, you have to charge, but I think you could help build your customer base by doing some things for free and getting your name out there. So she said, definitely, let's do that. So now they've set up a booth at our outdoor events. So now they're making contact with potential customers in a way that the person's not having to buy anything. And we are looking for other ways to expand that partnership so that they can begin to be a resource to the community before they start asking the community for something back. And that's something that I want to share with you. Give freely, give openly, give without strings attached. As you come up with things that you can do as a congregation, you're going to have some pressure from some in the congregation. I have people in the congregation who tell me, Israel, we should register the people who show up for lunch. Like, they should have to sign in. Like, we should capture their information. Or I actually had somebody who said, you know what, we're serving this lunch right after our service. If they're not in the service, they shouldn't be eating. I'm like, no, no, that's not how it works. We are giving freely without expectation of return. Do we have a hope of return? Yes, but the hope of return is a hope for them. My hope is that, as Paul told the Corinthians, one plants, another waters, God gives the increase. My hope is that whatever part I played in the process, planting a seed, watering that seed, whatever, that God is faithful to give an increase. And He might give that increase through that person's life somewhere else. I may have no idea what that person's journey is, but I got to plant, I got to water, and part of it without strings attached. I'm inviting them to lunch. I'm not going to invite them to lunch and do the bait and switch of, oh, by the way, show up an hour and a half early for church, and then you can eat free lunch. And so I shared with the pharmacist, I said, you know, get to know this neighborhood, get to connect with the people here. They'd only been in their location about a month, 2 months at the time that we did the food clinic. So get to know the neighborhood, and you can start to connect with them relationally, and then they might be in a position to receive services. So we're doing that with them, and even though that flu clinic was a, quote, failure, the reason I have a picture of that is because that's the kind of failing I want you to do. I want you to fail fast, I want you to fail often, I want you to fail forward. Because the flu clinic was a failure in the sense of not having a bunch of people show up and get flu shots. It was a success in the sense of me and the volunteers from my church stood in the lobby of my church and chatted with 4 employees of a local business for 2 hours, encouraging them so that they weren't depressed about how they spent their Saturday afternoon. And that has now turned into this thing where every time we have an event, a local business wants to be a part of it. And now when I go to the other businesses on the street, I say, hey, Good Life Pharmacy comes out and sets up a booth. You want to come out and set up a booth? And of course they're going to ask, well, you know, what do we have to pay to be a sponsor of your event? Nothing. Come get some free advertising. That failure became a success because it was a learning opportunity, because it was a connection point. This was a service project we did on a member's home. She had damage to the roof. We replaced part of the roof. We have been able to do things. We had a tornado, a freak occurrence in San Antonio. We don't typically have tornadoes. We had a tornado come through. We were able to send out a work crew kind of last minute, right after the tornado came through, and cut up logs and then take stuff. And here's the incredible thing. Our world is not wired for acts of kindness. Our world is not wired for acts of generosity without expectation of something in return. As we were out there with trucks and trailers and chainsaws, you know, getting limbs and branches out of people's yards, people were driving through the neighborhoods with trucks and trailers and chainsaws, yelling out the window, "We'll clean up for you, $100 an hour," or whatever. And people were paying them. I mean, they were desperate. People had trees in their houses and stuff. The fact that we were there, like, we had to convince people, we don't want money. We won't be charging you when we're done. We're just doing this because our church is across the street, and we got hit by the tornado too, and we care about you, and we want to help our neighborhood. Those kind of things create this domino effect. So Northern Hills Elementary, as I mentioned, that's the school next door to us. Let me encourage you about this domino effect with a couple stories of things that have happened. And I want to tell you these stories as a way of helping you to understand that no event or encounter needs to meet all the needs. So one mistake that I see churches falling into when they try to do church-wide events is the idea that at this one event with this captive audience, we must accomplish all things. It's a waste of our time to serve lunch and not also make them sit through a worship service. It's a waste of our time to clean up their yard and not, quote, preach the gospel to them. That mentality will box you in to the smallest possible number of options and will self-select your group to almost always be groups of people who are already believers. Unbelievers don't volunteer to go somewhere and hear the gospel, even if they can get a free lunch out of it. Unbelievers aren't interested in what's going on here. They don't want to be here. This is boring, out of touch, stupid, old-fashioned, and just not interesting to them. They have a life somewhere else. Expecting them to come and expecting to do everything all at once and being disappointed if you don't see, quote, results. Oh, we had 150 people show up to lunch, but one of them visited the next week. That was a failure. No, that's not a failure. The lunch is the success. You fed people, you showed them that you care about them, that you are a neighbor to them. Whether you see them coming to church, whether you see the rest of their journey, that doesn't determine whether it was a success. The success is in following Jesus' commands to love, to be generous, to share, to be hospitable, and trusting that He is in control. But you do start to see connections, you do start to see results over time as you continue to invest. So, quick story. We had a church picnic at a park. It was a good idea and a terrible location. The location was terrible because it was 35 minutes from our building. That's terrible because in San Antonio is a huge city with a ton of people, and so there's pockets. Wherever you live, you're within 5 or 10 minutes of post office, shopping, job, whatever. Everyone lives in their little pocket. They don't travel around the city much because the traffic's so terrible. So when we're 35 minutes away from our building to get at a particular park, no one that we're bumping into at that park has ever been where we are. They are down on the south side, we're up on the north side, they don't even know. We say we're on Higgins Road, they're like, what is that? So it was a bad location, but it was a picnic in the park. We encouraged families from our church to invite people who maybe wouldn't come to church, but would come to a picnic. And let me show you the chain of events. We had done a parents' night out, a date night for parents. So we'll babysit your kids, you go out on a date. While we're babysitting the kids, by the way, we're going to be telling them about God's love for them. But you get a free date. So, believe me, in a neighborhood with a bunch of young families, this was like, they signed up quick. Free babysitting at a church? Yes, please. So, there was a couple, she had been attending one of our women's meetings off and on, like 2 or 3 times over the course of like 6 months. A friend in our women's group had brought her to the mom to women's meeting. So the mom had come to women's meeting a few times, and the mom and dad dropped the kids off for babysitting and went on a date. The next week, mom and dad with the kids are at our church. They start attending our church. So a woman at a women's meeting, sporadically, a couple at a date night, visiting, attending the church, okay? So we have this span of things where at any point along this route, you could say, oh, I've invited my friend to women's meeting 10 times, she's come twice. It's a failure. No, it's not a failure. She is gradually having her life changed. Life change takes time. It takes work. It takes a change of perspective. If you were raised in the church, you're accustomed to church life. But if you're not part of the church life doesn't make any sense to you. It doesn't match your rhythms. It doesn't match what you do and what you spend your money on, what you spend your time on. So I invited her 10 times, she only showed up twice. Okay. Then they show up for the babysitting, and that gets the dad thinking, wow, this church might be kind of cool if they take care of our kids for free. So then they visit the church and they like it, so they keep coming back. They had a teenage son who was dating this girl at his high school. So they invited the girl's family to come to the picnic. Okay? So it's a new family to our church. They invite a family to come to the picnic. The family comes to the picnic. I don't see or hear of that family again for over a year. They came to the picnic with the daughter who was the girlfriend. I'm sitting in a YMCA waiting area. My kids were exercising, you can tell. My kids were getting swim lessons. I was in the waiting area. So I'm sitting there, and a woman walks up to me and says, "You're a pastor, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yeah." I didn't know that obvious, but yeah, I'm a pastor. She says, "I met you at a church picnic like a year ago." It's like, "Oh yeah, you're so-and-so's son's girlfriend's mom, right?" She says, "Yeah, I work here at the YMCA. I saw you sit down. I recognize you." She said, there's weird stuff happening in my house. Stuff falls off of shelves. Doors shut. There's weird screaming." She's like, it's scaring me to death, and it's scaring my daughters. So she has a biological daughter, and she has anywhere from 3 to 5 foster daughters in her home at any given time. And she says, it's freaking us out. She said, "I went to a priest, I went to somebody else, they told me I was crazy, they told me the girls were making it up." She said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I think that you have demons in your house, and I need to be driven out. I don't think you're crazy, I don't think you're making it up, I think that there are dark spiritual forces at work in your house, freaking you and your girls up." So she says, "Well, what can we do about that?" I said, "Well, I'll get my co-pastor, we'll come over, we'll pray for you and your house and your family." So we go, we pray for them. My co-pastor, love him, he's in his early 70s, and he's gotten to that point where he just says whatever he's thinking. He's not concerned if they like him or not. So he says to it, he says, "Jesus told this story about a person who had demons driven out of them, and they were swept clean and nice and set up. And then the demons came back and said, 'Wow, this place looks great,' and brought more friends, and it's worse than before." And he says to her, he says, "In a minute, we're going to pray for all the demons to leave, and they're going to leave, but then we're going to leave too. And if you don't fill this space and fill your lives with Jesus and the Holy Spirit, they're coming back, and they're coming back worse." And so he even asked me, he said, "So do you actually want us to pray? Because it will be worse in the future if you don't." I love it. All right. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. So yes, pray for us. Of course, they're in church the next week. This is actually the second family. The other one was before I got there. The second family that joined the church because that pastor prayed over their home to get rid of demons and then warned them, "You better get right with God." So my advice to you, if you ever pray for demons to leave somebody's house or their body or whatever, make sure to let them know this gets worse if you don't fill the space. So her family starts coming, and I'm just, so look at this chain of events. So then, in a sense, the chain of events stops there, but it doesn't stop there, because another day, it's super hot, and I've got some time, and I've got some opportunities, so I spend the best $40 my church has probably ever spent. I spend $40 on water bottles and ice, and I fill our big, huge cooler, and I stand in our parking lot when the parents are coming to pick up their kids, and I just hand a water bottle to each person that comes by and say, "Hey, it's hot out here, here's some water, I'm the pastor of the church, feel free to park here whenever to get your kids." Most of them were terrified that I was going to sell them something, that I was going to pitch them something. Some of them wouldn't take the water until I promised them, "Once you take the water, you're free to go." I could see, deer in the headlights, what is he going to say to me or ask of me for this water? And when they realized I'm just giving you water, I was like, "Wow, thank you." Like, it's a 75-cent bottle of water. but they were blown away that somebody would actually just give it to them and not expect something in return. So I'm handing out the water, about 200 parents come and go real quick with the kids, I'm handing out water. I walk over, I see there's some people, an elderly woman and several little kids sitting at the bus stop in front of the school. And I see them over there, and I'm thinking, wow, it's like 115 degrees outside. I don't know what that is in centigrade, but hot, very humid. I'm thinking, here's this woman, she's got to be 80, 90 years old. She's clearly taking care of grandkids or maybe great-grandkids. They're about to get on a city bus. So I walk over, hand them water, offer them a ride in my car to where they're going. She says, no, thank you. She says, why are you giving me water? Why are you offering us a ride? I said, well, I'm the pastor of the church next door. She looks at the sign. She says, New Hope United? I said, yeah. She says, CV's been telling me I need to go to church there. A family that had, at that point, stopped attending the church regularly because, whatever their reason week to week, they're not coming regularly, but they're telling all their neighbors, you've really got to go to church at New Hope United. The woman didn't know where it was until that moment. The ripple effects are incredible as you start to intentionally build the connections. A family that came for school supplies. Again, giving away the school supplies, it's awesome for the kids who get them, they need it, but it's a very low-level thing. It's a good entry place. We gave school supplies to a family. They visited our church a couple times. We ended up subsequently helping them financially. They have never regularly attended our church. They've probably been in our building 3 times. They came and called me up one night. They said, Pastor, we need marriage counseling. The husband had been involved in some really horrific sexual immorality on a business trip. And they said, we don't want to get divorced, but we don't know how to deal with this. Will you help us? I'm their pastor as far as they know. Again, they probably attended a Sabbath service twice. But I am the person they know cares about them and can share something with them from God. These kind of connections begin to happen. You begin to be a partner in your neighborhood. KLRN is a public radio station, public television. We found out about them through a worker at the school next door to us. Now KLRN has a play and learn group, mommy and me group. On Tuesday and Thursday mornings, they use our space, our classroom building for free. This summer, Be a Champion, a nonprofit organization that provides after-school programs, food, summer programs. They needed a place to do their summer program for about 50 kids. They're going to use our house that is our fellowship hall Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. for 2 months this summer. Do I want to see every one of those kids, every one of those families come into a life-saving relationship with Jesus Christ and inherit the fullness, eternal, abundant life? Yes. Do I need that to happen in the one moment that I see them or talk to them or have them on our property? No. That's not how that kind of life change happens. I want to show you a map real quick, and then I want to have a heart-to-heart with Richard. All right, so this is where our building is located. What I would challenge you as a congregation, and not just your leaders, as a congregation, what I would challenge you is that you should know this area. You should know what are businesses, what are homes, what are nonprofit organizations, what are schools, who are the community partners, who can we join arms with to spread abundant life into this area surrounding us. As we grow, can we expand that area? Definitely. But starting somewhere where you can start to make an impact. I can tell you, by God's grace, in 4 years in that building, everyone who lives here knows that there is a church that loves them and cares about them at that corner. If that's what we could accomplish in 4 years, I trust God to accomplish way more in years to come. But for now, everyone in our neighborhood knows we are there and we love them. How does it happen? Sharing the parking, handing out water bottles, winter clothing drives. I know that's comical in a place where you actually have winter. Winter in San Antonio is 55 and rainy. But people wear winter clothes down there, so kids don't have winter clothes. We collected winter clothes. And then sometimes it's the little things. So we collected winter clothes, but we also bought one of those price tag guns. And we made little tags that say, a gift from your friends at New Hope United Church. And shot one of those into each of the hats and gloves and coats. So they know where it came from. The Parents' Night Out, volunteering, connecting with the family specialists and the other people at the schools, providing the space to daycares and other groups, providing volunteers and resources. This is how, as a congregation, you start to make these inroads into your community and start to move in the direction of being just in a community, to the community, to with a community. All right, here's my heart-to-heart with Richard. You might want to pause the broadcast. No.